No, once you had the shows on, we used to go and rehearse there, and one would be very occupied. We'd open one show, usually Anne of Green Gables, and then we'd be playing that at night and rehearsing in the daytime, and then we'd open the second show, and we'd play them maybe in alternate nights and rehearse in the daytime for a third show. So that kept one very busy. But after you got all the shows rehearsed and had your days free, there wasn't an awful lot you could do. Go to the beach, if you had a car or knew somebody who had a car to take you there. But one reason I didn't go, we're not taping, are we?
Well, we are, but we can leave it off if you don't want it. That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't go back was because it was just too far from home, too long a season, and I'd sort of had it.
Yeah. How did you get there in the first place? I mean, what brought you? How did you?
Oh, well, I could tell you that. Well, it was during the tour of 100 Years of Musical Comedy that we played in Charlottetown, and I was seen by Alan Lund, who was the artistic director at that time, and so he invited me to go back, and the first season I played Miss Stacy, the school teacher, and Mrs. Blewett in Anne of Green Gables. Mrs. Blewett is in the first half of the play, and Miss Stacy's in the second half. So at intermission I could change from one character to the other. And then I was in Sunshine Sketches, and then the next year I went back. I played the Aunt Maggie in Johnny Belinda, which was adapted by Maver Moore, as you know. Mm-hmm. And so it was through 100 Years of Musical Comedy that I went to the Charlottetown for 2 seasons.
Was that the first time that you worked with Maver Moore, or had you had opportunity?
Well, I didn't actually work with Maver. He adapted Johnny Belinda for the musical, but I met Maver, but I didn't actually work with him.
Who directed you in that?
Alan Lund.
He did.
Mm-hmm.
He directed. Was he exclusively your director, basically?
Mm-hmm. Yes, he was, and he had assistants, of course, who took over different parts when he was, because he was doing the choreography too. But he was the director.
Was it? Who else was in the company? Do you remember who else was in the company?
Bill Coles, Barbara Hamilton was Marilla. Peter Muse was Matthew in Anne of Green Gables, and a very, very young Jeff Hislop was in it, and Gracie Finley, who was a PEI girl, was playing Anne. Susan Anderson from Vancouver was in it. I think she played the character, was it Diane? Was a secondary lead in it.
Right. So did you see a brilliant future for Jeff Hislop, that young man?
Well, yes, because his dancing was fantastic. He wasn't as experienced in acting or singing at that time, but he's caught up with that too.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else that you can think about, that you think of when you think of Charlottetown, other than it's a very quiet place?
Very beautiful place. That in the summertime, the redness of the earth and the greenness of the green in contrast to the red soil, and then the glimpse of the blue sea around and the blue sky. It was just, it's an extremely beautiful place. And I remember when the shows were on, and we had all the shows, perhaps 3, had been worked on, and so that we were only required for matinees in the daytime, and which I think were a couple of times a week, and then night performances. Our days were free. It was wonderful to. The second season, I drove across Canada, so I had my car with me, and I'd love to get in the car and just go for a drive in the country and see it and smell the fresh air, because there's not very much industry there to pollute the air. And the air was so clear, and so all those beautiful colors seemed magnified. I just loved the island itself.
Do you find any differences in audiences that are just visiting a place as like tourists, as opposed to when you perform in a city like Vancouver, where you're really performing to your the people that live in your city? Is there a different level of enthusiasm or interest, or?
No, I wasn't struck by that. I think they were possibly in a holiday mood, a lot of the audiences, and therefore had come to enjoy themselves. You sometimes got that feeling from them, because I think probably our audiences were mainly tourists.
Right. From there, I just wanted to go back in time again, because now I'd like to spend a little bit of time following up on your radio career and looking at some of the things that you talked about before. You mentioned singing Stars of Tomorrow, but you also, further on, you got into Leicester Square, is it?
Leicester Square.
There. And Betty Phillips Sings. Well, that was sort of an evolution, that you were one of many and you then got your own show. Is that how it happened? Or?
No, I actually started with my own show. One of the radio producers phoned me one day and said, "How would you like to do a 15-minute show of your own?" sort of out of the blue. And I had been working in an office of a flour mill. And so when this happened, a friend of mine, a pianist friend of mine, John Emerson, said, "Why don't you quit the office job and spend your time full-time on music and theater?" And so I did that. This 15-minute a week show gave me a temporary living to do that. So I thought, well, yeah, okay, I'll try it. So I left the office where my two bosses there had been very, very kind to me in understanding that I wanted to pursue a musical singing and acting career, and were very cooperative in letting me take time off to go to auditions and things like that. They were really quite marvelous. And so I left that job and did this weekly 15-minute program. And from that, other things came, and I got into stage and even in the early days, I enjoyed acting as much as I did singing. So if I wasn't singing, I would, if I could, get into just a straight dramatic play. And because I felt that by working with experienced actors, I could probably learn a lot there too.
That was, many people describe it, the golden days of radio. There was so much, it seemed to be a lot of radio being produced, a lot of radio plays and dramas in Vancouver.
Well, this was before television, you see. This was before, I think television came in about 54, I think, here. And this was in the late 40s and early 50s that that I started in radio, CBC radio.
If you describe what it was like working in that environment, was it quite frantic? Was there a lot of shows going on at the same time and people, all, you know?
Oh, there was a lot going on, but I wouldn't describe it as being frantic by any means. I suppose one of the main differences then was that things were done live. They weren't pre-recorded and broadcast later, and so you couldn't stop, and they weren't edited. You had to get it right the first time, and of course that resulted in sometimes in plays in particular in mistakes being made that were quite amusing. Things that went on the air that shouldn't have gone on the air. But the same thing happened in television, of course. They didn't pre-tape shows in the early days, and therefore be able to stop and start and correct and edit, redo things. It was done live, and so you had to, as I say, get it right the first time. I can remember some funny things happening. For instance, when I did a folk song program on television called Lolly Totem. I did it with the singer Ernie Prentice and an orchestra conducted by George Kalanges. We did it in an auxiliary studio, auxiliary to the CBC, which was on Georgia and Butte. It had been an old car showroom, and it was just amazing the productions that originated there. And I can remember one Lolly Totem program where we had some ducks on the set, and the stagehands built a little pool for these ducks, and with some kind of what looked like plasticine, made a little wall and put water in the inside for these ducks. And during the break before doing the show, they put the ducks into this little pool. And they were a bit muddy looking, actually, and so they had a wonderful time washing themselves in this pool. But then when the show started and they came out of the pool, they were lovely and clean, but under the lights they were warm and they were drying, and they were very, very happy ducks, and they quacked like mad, and you could hardly hear us because of the quacking of these ducks. Then on another occasion, I remember, I was singing a duet with Ernie, and I was on one side of him, of course, and then the camera dollied in on him, and he sang a solo, and then they wanted to come up on me, but they wanted me on the other side of him. So the problem was, without stopping the continuity of the camera movement, they asked me if after doing the duet, the camera would pan in just on Ernie, which would allow me to get down on my hands and knees and crawl behind Ernie and come up on his other side. I don't know quite what the cameraman was thinking of at the time, but anyway, what happened was, and what the audience saw, was me all of a sudden getting down on my hands and knees and sort of the tip of my bottom showing above a little wall as I crawled behind Ernie and came up on the other side, quite smiling and unaware of anything being wrong. But these are the kinds of things that you don't have now because of all the pre-taping and re-recording.
With the technology in those days, did you find that the lights, did they have a lot of light on you and a lot of makeup? Did you have to go through a lot of that?
Yes, yeah. Yes.
Was that uncomfortable for you, or was it just something you just accepted as must be the way?
Oh, accepted it as being the right thing at that time.
Yeah. You went back to Toronto at, was it your first television? Die Fleeter?
Die Fledermaus? Die Fledermaus.
Was that your
Johann
first
Strauss's Die Fledermaus. Yes, that was my first television experience. And so that was kind of a big thing. The orchestra was not in the same building with us. And so one couldn't watch the live conductor conducting. The conductor's arms were then just sort of like two little things on a television screen, which perhaps you could see and perhaps you couldn't because of the staging. So that had problems. I can remember on one set we had to run in and out of a kind of grape arbor where the grapes were trained up over trellises and things, and that was very difficult because the song that we had to sing was a very quick tempo, and to keep in time with it, to remember the moves in and out of these grape arbors, and to hear the sound, which was piped into us, of course. But it was almost impossible, I remember, during that number to get my eye to connect with the conductor on the small set.
Yeah, so being your first time, you wouldn't have really had any
previous experience. No. So that was interesting. And it was a great privilege to sing with the great tenor John Vickers, who was in that production.
Was that intimidating, or was it just enjoyable?
No, he was marvelous and very, very helpful. Delightful person.
I didn't bring any questions, but I know we talked about perhaps talking a little bit about the Vancouver Opera, because you did spend a great deal of time working with them. Was this production in Toronto through your work with the Vancouver Opera?
No, it was before I'd worked with the Vancouver Opera.
When did you first start working with the Vancouver Opera?
I guess that would be in the late 50s. I understudied the opera Carmen. That was the first thing I did. Then I did Flora in La Traviata and Niklaus, which they call a pants role. It's a male part, which is usually played by a female. Niklaus is the companion to the lead in the Tales of Hoffmann. And then I was in Norma, in which Joan Sutherland played the leading role, and Marilyn Horne was also in that production. And one of the most delightful memories I have is of listening to Joan Sutherland and Marilyn Horne singing the duets from Norma. We rehearsed in the Scottish Auditorium, and the full opera orchestra was there, and these two voices, it was just absolutely hair-raising. It was wonderful.
You performed your venue. What was your venue at that time for performances?
The Queen Elizabeth Theatre.
So that was exclusively you. And how long?
That's where we performed, right. Norma. Mm-hmm.
And what about the rest of the seasons? Was it always there, or was it?
Yes, always in Queen Elizabeth.
And how many years were you with the Vancouver Opera?
Oh, spasmodically, on and off. I think I did about 5 or 6 productions with them.
Did you find the challenges any different for you working with them as opposed to working with Tuts or working with?
Well, one thing I found, I remember that was totally new to me, was the prompt box. I had never experienced a prompter in a box on stage ever before performing in Norma, and I guess they have this in Covent Garden or Sadler's Wells and those big opera houses in London, and this was the first time that Dame Joan had done Norma, and so she wanted to have the prompter. So the pianist conductor John Avison, local conductor, became the prompter. And the disturbing thing for me was that the prompter anticipates the next line. So in other words, while you're singing one line, he quietly comes in with the beginning of the next line. And at first I felt, am I behind? Am I late? But one adjusts to this kind of thing. But that was something I had never experienced before.
Are there any other memories of your time with Vancouver Opera that stand out? Not that they.
No, I can't think of anything going wildly wrong or being very funny.
Yeah. How were the audiences in those days? Were you very competitive with the other theater venues when you were doing your opera, or is it hard to pack the house, or was it?
I think sometimes when they've done the lesser known operas, the audiences haven't been as large. Opera audiences seem to like to stick to their old favorites, the Madame Butterfly and La Bohème and Traviata. I think you'd have to speak to somebody within the opera company itself who would, be able to look at box office returns for you.
Well, I think I pretty much covered what I was planning to cover.
Mm-hmm.
Was there anything that I blatantly...
I don't think so. What I should have asked you before was, this interview is really more concentrated on the development of local theatre, isn't it? I mean, that's the...
in BC.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or in the Maritimes, like Charlottetown, for them, was the beginning of theatre for them. So it started a lot earlier here than it did, let's say, in other parts of the country. I think Ontario and BC.
There's I've also performed in Kamloops. Now that's a regional theatre, Western Canada Theatre. Oh golly, that would be in the 70s, I think.
I've just sort of gone up to the 70, pretty much.
Yeah.
Because it's such a huge topic.
Yes.
In and of itself.
But when you get to that, I'll just tell you that we had to perform in the Ukrainian Hall in Kamloops, and so that was a kind of theater in development. They didn't have a theater of their own. I don't think they do even now. I think aren't they in school? I think they share a school auditorium.
A lot of small communities still are in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
So was that a particularly challenging?
But one thing, yes, it was, in that their lighting board and their sound board had to be actually in the hall to one side of the audience. They didn't have any kind of lighting panel backstage. One thing I think that the centennial year did was to create a lot of new theaters in Canada, in smaller towns, and that's one thing that would be interesting for you to pursue. you know, how theater has developed since '67 because of having all these new venues available. They built the communities, towns and communities built theaters particularly for the centennial year in order to be able to put on things themselves or have things or bring in productions.
Gave out a lot of money.
Yeah.
In those days
So that, I don't know if anybody's ever done a study on whether there was suddenly a sudden new
Explosion.
burst in theater development in regional theater.
It could have been, in kind of, if not in terms of venues, even in companies, getting companies going.
Yes.
That kind of thing.
Well, I mean, if you form a company, you've got to have some place to
Perform.
play.
Yeah. Although, as you say, sometimes it's just the local high school or whatever.
Yeah, but that's not very conducive
No.
to doing good theater, is it?
No.
Whereas this new center that was opened in Newfoundland, it just had everything. But I don't know how much was going on in the theater
In Newfoundland or...
in St. John's.
Yeah.
St. John's,
They
Newfoundland.
were getting